The story of the Mexican-American War begins long before the first shot was fired. It begins in a world where nations were still young, fragile, and constantly shifting. A world where the boundaries of North America were not yet fixed, and where ambition could redraw maps in a single decade. In this world, two nations, Mexico and the United States, stood on opposite courses. One nation rising with extraordinary momentum, convinced of its own destiny. The other struggling to survive the chaos born from independence. The collision between them was not only predictable, it was almost inevitable. When Mexico achieved independence from Spain in 1821, it inherited not just freedom, but an immense stretch of land territories that today include California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, and more. Yet beneath this vastness lay a fragile reality. 11 years of war had devastated the population, drained the treasury, and fractured the political landscape. Mexico was born not in stability, but in exhaustion. Roads were ruined, farms abandoned, cities struggling to rebuild. Presidents came and went with dizzying speed. Coups, rebellions, and regional divisions defined the early years of the Republic. And while Mexico attempted to build a functioning nation, foreign powers watched closely. To the north, the United States had a very different story. It was expanding at a rapid pace, its economy booming, its government stable, and its population surging westward. The idea of manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to expand across the continent, was spreading through newspapers, speeches, and political circles. As American settlers reached the frontier, they stared toward the vast Mexican north and saw opportunity, land, and future prosperity. To many Americans, this was not someone else's territory. It was the unfinished promise of the continent. European powers had their own interests. Britain, the world's greatest empire at the time, feared a United States that would grow too powerful. British merchants invested heavily in Mexican mines and trade networks and hoped Mexico could serve as a counterweight to U.S. expansion. France, with its imperial ambitions not yet extinguished, saw Mexico as a potential foothold for future expansion in the Americas. All these ambitions converged on a single point: Mexico's weakness. Nowhere were these pressures more visible than in Texas. In the early 1800s, Mexico invited American settlers to move into the sparsely populated Texas region. The goal was simple: boost the population and secure the frontier from raids. The effect, however, was dramatic. American settlers poured into Texas, farmers, ranchers, adventurers, slave owners, gradually outnumbering Mexican citizens. They brought their own language, customs, and laws. Tensions grew as Mexico tried to enforce its authority, especially laws banning slavery. Many settlers simply refused to obey. The result was a violent break. The Texas Revolution erupted in 1836. The fall of the Alamo became a symbol of heroic resistance for Americans and brutal defiance for Mexicans. General Santa Anna's march across Texas resulted in bloodshed and anger, but his eventual defeat at San Jacinto secured Texas's independence. A new nation, the Republic of Texas, was born. But the dispute was far from over. Mexico refused to accept Texas as independent. Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its southern border. Mexico insisted on the Nueces River. The land between these rivers became a no-man's land filled with tension, raids, and rival armies. For almost 10 years, Texas existed in a strange limbo, independent yet threatened. When Texas asked the United States for annexation, Mexico declared that such an act would be considered aggression. And yet, in 1845, the United States annexed Texas, fully aware that doing so could ignite a war. President James K. Polk, a firm believer in expansion, wanted more than Texas. He wanted California. He wanted New Mexico. He wanted America to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Polk sent diplomats to Mexico to negotiate the purchase of these territories. Mexico refused to even meet them. To Polk, this was unacceptable. He needed leverage. The president ordered General Zachary to march his troops into the disputed land between the Nueces and the Rio Grande. This was a deliberate provocation. Mexico saw it as an invasion. Tension rose by the day. And then, in April 1846, the spark finally struck. Mexican cavalry clashed with American soldiers. blood was shed. Polk used the incident to rally Congress, famously declaring, "American blood has been shed on American soil." War was declared. Some questioned Polk's claim, including a young Abraham Lincoln, who challenged the president to show the exact spot of spilled blood. But the momentum for war was unstoppable. The early battles unfolded quickly. At Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, American forces defeated Mexican troops with discipline, artillery advantage, and superior logistics. Taylor pushed deeper into Mexico, capturing Monterrey after brutal street fighting. Meanwhile, American naval forces turned toward the Pacific. California became a new front. American settlers launched the Bear Flag Revolt, briefly declaring California an independent republic before joining U.S. forces. U.S. ships seized coastal ports. In New Mexico, American troops marched into Santa Fe nearly unopposed, securing the territory without significant resistance. Yet the decisive blow came with a bold and unprecedented strategy. President Polk ordered General Winfield Scott to lead an amphibious landing at Veracruz, the first such operation in American military history. Thousands of soldiers stormed the beaches under the cover of naval guns. The siege of Veracruz lasted weeks until the city surrendered. Scott then began a long march inland, following the same route that the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés had taken centuries earlier. The journey was filled with fierce battles. Cerro, Gordo, Contreras, Churubusco, Molino del Rey. Each battle brought the American army closer to the gates of Mexico City. The final defense stood at Chapultepec, a fortress nestled atop a rocky hill. Young Mexican cadets, many still teenagers, fought desperately to defend it. Their courage became legendary in Mexican memory, but the fortress eventually fell. American forces entered Mexico City. The war, for all practical purposes, was over. Mexico could no longer resist. But while the battles raged, the world watched with great interest. Britain feared a United States that might become too dominant. British diplomats quietly explored ways to limit American expansion, even considering whether to support Mexican resistance. France kept a close eye on events, imagining a future when it could intervene in a decade later. Across Latin America, nations observed the war as a warning. If the United States could take half of Mexico, then no country in the region was safe from American ambition. In February 1848, the two nations signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in a quiet village near Mexico City. The treaty forced Mexico to surrender nearly half of its territory to the United States, including California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The United States paid Mexico $15 million, a sum that did little to ease the emotional wound. For Americans, the treaty marked the fulfillment of manifest destiny. The dream of a nation stretching from ocean to ocean had finally become reality. For Mexico, it was a national trauma, a staggering loss of land, resources, and pride. Yet the consequences of the war did not end with the treaty. In the United States, the new territories intensified the debate over slavery. Would these lands be free or slave states? The question tore the nation apart and pushed it closer to the Civil War. Many American officers who fought in Mexico, Grant, Lee, Davis, Jackson, would later face each other in the bloodiest conflict in American history. In Mexico, political instability deepened, distrust of the government grew. Regional divisions widened. Eventually, the weakened nation became vulnerable to foreign intervention, culminating in the French invasion of the 1860s. Globally, the war signaled a new era. The United States had proven its power. It was no longer a young republic limited to the Atlantic seaboard. It had become a continental empire with access to the Pacific, to global trade, and to resources beyond imagination. The world began to rethink the balance of power in the Americas. The Mexican-American War lasted just 2 years, but it changed everything. It redrew borders, reshaped nations, and set the stage for conflicts that would follow. It remains a story of ambition and loss, courage and miscalculation, destiny and tragedy. And though the war ended more than a century and a half ago, its legacy still shapes the identity, politics, and relations of North America today. This is the story of the war that defined two nations, the conflict that reshaped a continent, and the moment in history when foreign ambitions, national pride, and the hunger for land collided in a struggle that changed the world forever.